Joining me today on Impact Catalyst is Frank Hamilton, PhD and Associate Professor of Management at Eckerd College. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
You've had a fun run, I will say. You've had an interesting life, and there are a couple of interesting sort of juxtapositions in it. Want to set the stage a little bit. First, sort of half of your professional life was spent in the military, traveling. Can you give us a little flavor around that?
Yeah, I spent 22 years in the Army, and I was an ammunition logistician. So I did everything from transport and storage to research and development. Spent 10 and a half years in Germany, a year and a half in Turkey. So I traveled kind of all over the place. Spent 2.5 years in the Pentagon, pushing dollars for the Secretary of the Army. And so I got a flavor of a lot of things. My time working at the Pentagon has paid tremendous dividends later in life because I understand now the ways of bureaucracy and the ways of how money works in the government. And so when I finally did retire in 1992, I came to Tampa. And I came to Tampa because I bought property in Sarasota and said, okay, let's go someplace that has a university because I've got a GI Bill and at some point in time I want to use it. And so I settled in Tampa, worked for Dale Carnegie for a couple of years. Yep. It was kind of an interesting thing. I met the Dale Carnegie guys at a business fair run by the Tampa Chamber. And the two biggest lies that could ever be said were said. And that was, we're not hiring. And I said, I'm not looking for a job. I ended up, working for Dale Carnegie. Met some great people while I was there. And went into business with a couple of partners that I met through Dale Carnegie. We did an employee leasing company. And so again, I'm using my background with understanding how you manage people and do the human resources thing.
Would you say that, obviously you said the bureaucracy, but as a logistician with ammunition and things like that, was it later in your career you were managing teams? Did you have a business/entrepreneurial mindset then, or did that sort of come? Was the Dale Carnegie thing a transformation for you?
No, actually, what happened is I started out in the Army as a bomb disposal officer. So I had a bomb disposal team. I had 15 people working for me. About 10 and a half years of my 20 some odd years, I had soldiers directly working for me. I started out, like I said, with 15. And in my last job, I had about 3,000. So I had people working for me, and it was through the people that we accomplished the mission. I had never thought about business at all. Just wasn't one of my things. And while I was stationed in Germany, the general that I worked for kind of pulled me up out of obscurity and said, you seem like you understand how business operates. Well, I took a crash course in how business works, courtesy of the Army. He said, I've got a club system, which was one officer's club, 4 enlisted clubs, and a rod and gun club that were losing a lot of money. And he was on the dime for that. And so he said, you are my guy. Fix it. That was my...
And that quality, is that pragmatism? Was that the leading thing that?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. I think it was being a quick study and being at the right place in the right time. So I'd say it's a little bit of preparation, and it's a lot of luck. Timing is was very important here.
You got free MBA there in action, essentially.
Yeah, it was. I mean, again, my undergraduate is history psychology. There was no business at all in it. And I got my master's in administration before they had MPAs. So, really, I was thinking, start organizations more than anything else. And I got this club system out of debt. Of course, that was what I was told to do, so I did it. A lot of work. Learned more about running retail facilities than I ever wanted to learn. Crash course in hiring. It was. You're exactly right. It was an MBA in action. And in the military, the club systems are real dollars. They're not appropriated funds. And so that's real cash you got out there. And so you count it. It's kept in a government way, but if you lose money, you really lose money. And you just can't write it off at the end of the year. Doesn't work that way. So when I got out of the Army, this is kind of in the back of my mind. And I go into Dale Carnegie and I start visiting lots of small businesses. Well, I was doing that when we were doing the employee leasing too. So I'm getting a snapshot of what business looks like. And so after the employee leasing, I said, okay, I got to pause. My GI Bill is running out. Let's go get a PhD. And again, wasn't thinking business. I was thinking history. And I went to USF and it dawned on me. I should have done a little bit more exploring when I picked a place with a university.
Right.
I just assumed they had a history degree. They didn't.
So well, two things. First, I don't want to ever tell you how to tell your story, but I'd lead with the bomb disposal thing. That's pretty cool. I mean, ammunition logistics is nice, but that's got some cool factor. But how was the experience of starting and running the PEO? I mean, did I give you that didn't ignite a fire? You're still going back to history? It just proved to me we could do this. It proved to me that, I had the ability and the intelligence to start a successful business. And it got sold. Somebody came along and bought it. Company whose name I could use, and you would go, oh, I've heard of them. So, obviously we did well. We did well enough to be sold, but still it was kind of, I was thinking about going back for history. And USF didn't have a history doctorate. They said, you got to go to Gainesville. I said, I don't want to do that. And so I was commiserating my sorrow at not being able to get this degree with the guy running the leadership center at the University of Tampa, who I had met, was kind of a fellow traveler in a way. He had a PhD from Northwestern, and he said, so what do you want to do with this degree? Why do you want to do history? And I said, well, I'm really kind of interested in leadership. He said, so why don't you get a degree in leadership? Okay. I'd not thought about that before. So having mentors at the right time in your life comes very nicely. And I went back to USF and I looked to see if they had a leadership, and they did in two separate places. They had it in the College of Education. They have a PhD in education leadership. And although they didn't have a PhD program in the College of Business, they did have a leadership specialty in the MBA program. So I went and talked to both of them. I interviewed. One thing I was told by PhD halfway through my military career when I taught Army ROTC at Ohio State was, you're going to be an old guy when you get your PhD. Go find a school that will accept you for what you want to do. Which I thought was, again, good advice. And I met the chair of the marketing department at USF, and he was a leadership guy. That's what he was. And so I'm like, oh, that's cool. I'm in the business school. And I get accepted, and I work on my doctorate. And basically, his first task to me was go find every graduate course at the university has the word leadership in the title. There were 80 of them. And so we sat down and we figured out a program for me. So here I am doing leadership. I know, what's that have to do with business? What's that have to do with animals? It doesn't,
it fits, but it doesn't fit. But I'm now in the business school. So because my master's degree was from the University of Southern California in 1975, I had old knowledge. I had to go through the MBA program basically to get my doctorate. So I'm learning all this business stuff, and I'm saying, well, I've kind of done all this stuff. I've been there. Started a business, worked in business, saved a couple of businesses. And at that time, I come to this realization business would be a very interesting place for me to be. And this is when I meet animals for the first time in grad school. My wife and I were both workaholics. That's what we did. If you couldn't do it in 12 hours, do it in 14. We were all very focused. And I said to her one day, I said, you really probably need to find a hobby. Now, busman's holiday kind of thing, I guess. And so she found an animal rescue group in Tampa, and she started working. Of course, if you've got a wife that's volunteering someplace, you follow her. And I realized something very quickly. These guys loved animals, but they really didn't understand the management side of the game. That's not what they did. And I'd been in several nonprofits. At that time, actually, I was on the board of directors for the Boy Scouts in Hillsborough County. And I was familiar with the nonprofit world, kind of. And so I started volunteering for these guys. And my wife and I said, all right, we ought to do something for this organization. By that time, she was the treasurer. And we ought to establish a budget for this organization. I know, radical, right? Not for most businesses, but for these particular types of nonprofits, that is radical. And so we started doing a little research. And it came to our attention that we had saved 350 animals that year. It was all virtual. It was all weekends and nights kind of thing with people that were doing other things. And we were very proud of ourselves. And then we realized that's how many animals that were killed or euthanized in Hillsborough County in the first 4 days of the year. All right, so now, and again, I'll skip to the entrepreneurship part because entrepreneurship is really all about finding a problem that needs to be solved. So that's kind of how we approach entrepreneurship here at Eckerd. So you got, what's the problem that needs to be solved? If you can monetize it, great. It then becomes a for-profit. If you can't monetize it, it's a social problem. Then you go the other way. You do the nonprofit thing. So we're both looking at it. This is crazy. This is absolutely crazy. Now, I'm still in grad school, so I'm still reading 400, 500 pages a week. And we said, we probably need to study this and see if somebody in the country has figured out how to fix it. Because if this is going on all over the country, we got a real problem on our hands. And what we did was we took 6 months off from the nonprofit. We just kind of took a leave of absence and said, okay, we're going to study. And we started finding places that were solving the problem. On the trail of solving the problem, come to realize that the Tampa Tribune at the time had published a series of articles about how bad it was for animals in Hillsborough County. They were euthanizing somewhere between 29,000 and 34,000 animals a year. That's a bunch. And so we finally said, all right, let's get into the animal business. And what do we need to do? And what we decided on doing was opening a high quality, high volume spay-neuter clinic. And there was a model, but again, a business model in North Carolina. And they were just in the place where they wanted to start expanding. So we were clinic number 9. There are now 200 of them, where we actually copied the model. But again, it's still, at the end of the day, debits have to equal credits. So it's still a business, nonprofit. So we can get money from other places, but still got to run it like a business. Still got to hire people. You got to fire people. You got to do the profit and loss statements and all of that stuff. And oh, by the way, handle a lot of animals. So we opened the doors in 2006. I retired from it the first time in 2015. And in 2014, our gross was about 3.4 million a year, and we had 50 employees. And we were seeing 24,000 animals a year. So we grew it from nothing, the proverbial napkin, to what it was. Well, at the same time, I'm finishing my doctorate and I'm looking for a job. Well, I can't very well leave Tampa. That kind of limits me a little bit. And so I started hunting, and I'm very fortunate in the year I came on the market that there were 3 schools that were looking for management professors. And Eckerd was the one that I walked on campus and I said, I don't ever want to leave. I love it. So I've been a professor of management here I'm in my 17th year. So I look at this as, and you started this by saying, well, you've had several careers. Yes, I count the Army time. That's one career. I count the for-profit and nonprofit business as a whole separate career. There's about 15 years there, 16 years. And now here I am in my 3rd career.
So I want to dig into the direction you went with the animals, with the cats specifically. It sounds like this fell in your lap almost, similar to what that CO gave you the job to balance the budget back in the service, right? And it was a big gaping problem, and you just have to solve it. And you click the pragmatism operation skill button, and it goes on. But somewhere in there, because as a true utilitarian pragmatist, we'll call it, logic, you can go either way with the ways to solve the feral cat population issues and so on and so forth. But you've ended up done a lot of writing and put a lot of work out there and a lot of time into this specific solution, which is to catch, spay, and release, essentially,
right,
or neuter and release.
Right.
So
return. We use return.
Return. Okay. So did that come to you as the right choice? What were sort of the facets? Was it the people you were with? Was it the research you did on your own? Why did that make the most sense to you, that you would argue that passionately for it?
Kind of all of the above. When you look at the history of animal welfare in the United States, stray cats have become, since the 50s, 60s, and 70s, a bigger and bigger problem, a bigger and bigger challenge. And it was a glaring hole. Now, granted, when we started the clinic, we were looking at really 4 kinds of animals that were going into animal services: own dogs, own cats, stray cats, and stray dogs. But when you looked at the numbers, when you actually analyzed the numbers, and at the end of the day, I'm a numbers guy. And I have all the way back to 1996, Hillsborough County Animal Services numbers. And when you got a database that big in Excel, you can play with it and start finding out things. And what I quickly realized was 30 to 40% of all the animals going into Hillsborough County Animal Services back then were stray cats. It was a big problem, and they were being killed. So it came to me doing that analysis, but also in talking to people around the country. I was at the University of Michigan on a grant, an animal grant, to write a paper. And they brought in some experts. And one of the experts that came in to talk to me was from Humane Society of the United States, one of their chief scientific officers. And he read what I had written, which was how we do this challenge. He said, "Why don't you have feral cats in there? Because that's a challenge, isn't it?" And then we went on for like 25 minutes about, yeah, it's a challenge, and it appears to be a challenge across the country. He said, "Why aren't you writing about it?" So again, timing, who you talk to, you know. And so, I then went from trying to solve it locally to then doing the academic writing about it. Because when it comes to animal policy, specifically feral cats, there's not a whole bunch out there being written about it. And that's a problem, because the people that are going to be able to fund this problem, which is the government, if they don't know anything about it, they'll listen to the best voice that comes along, whatever it is. And some of the, and I don't like using the word best. Some of the loudest voices right now just say kill them all.
And why don't you? So that sort of gets more to the heart of my question, because both ways ultimately aim to reduce the population of strays, whether through limiting the reproduction or just outright killing them, which obviously also limits the reproduction. So why did you say it's better to return them, go through that surgery and return them, knowing that at the end of their life they're done, versus ending their life at that point?
Well, the issue is really a couple fold. But as a scientist, as a research scientist, nobody has shown me yet that killing solves the problem. The standard that is used across the United States right now is it's a reactive thing on the part of animal control. Animal control goes out, picks up the animals, they kill them, but guess what happens? There's enough of them out there that they just reproduce. And the only place that has been able to actually eradicate cats is on remote Pacific islands. Well, guess what? If you don't bring any more cats in on a boat, they're not. You've got a manageable population. Now, it's very expensive to do it, and it's very time consuming. And if you use the methods that they used on those Pacific islands in the city of Tampa, for example, or Pinellas County, because that seems to be, there's now an issue, that's a separate issue. But I now live in Pinellas County, so of course I'm paying attention to it. But there was one Pacific island that had human beings with owned cats on it. And in the process of getting rid of all the feral cats, they killed 40% of the owned cats. And how do you think those voters felt? So show me where it works, because the people that bring them to us for fixing. If I said to him, I said, "Joe, bring your cat to me and I'll kill him," you know what's going to happen? You're not going to bring me the cat. One of the things about doing this non-lethal management is the fact that other people go, "Okay, that makes sense to me." Now, there are some people out there that doesn't make sense to, but
my assumption was that, if you assume that a species will breed till the limits of its environment, right? And if you bring cats in and kill them, then, unless you've killed enough to kill the breeding cycle, it's just going to bloom back and fill that space. Whereas if you return a spayed cat, it takes up that space. It owns that alley. It owns that neighborhood, but it can't reproduce. And so it's sort of blocking a space while also not being able to reduce. And then theoretically over time, if you can get to a tipping point where enough of them are filling space that aren't reproducing, obviously as they die, that space becomes open, but you get that sort of lag in there of space filling. That's the sort of technical benefit.
And you're absolutely right. The wildlife biologists have done this with a variety of wildlife species and realized that culling just doesn't necessarily work. because they will breed to capacity. And capacity is feeding, and also if there are higher level predators, that keep the population to a certain level. All of that stuff that wildlife biology talks about is alive and well when it comes to feral cats, or as we call them now, community cats. Because one of the most recent studies said about 60% of owned cats are out on the streets roaming. So they're not just feral cats. They're variety cats. And if you go into the poor neighborhoods, then you even have them in regular neighborhoods. One of the reasons we actually got started in animals to begin with was we had 2 porch cats. Couldn't touch them, but we fed them. And then we realized one day, hey, everybody thought they were ours. We thought they were somebody else's. And you find that if you go down in Ybor City right now, there are restaurants that feed spaghetti to the cats or Cuban sandwiches or whatever the case may be. So there are a lot of these guys just kind of hanging around, and they're a commensurate species. The more people there are, the more cats there are.
So that brings us to now, mostly. And a lot of the work that you do, you've mentioned a few times mentoring, you've mentioned right place, right time. And, to me, all of that goes towards an appreciation for serendipity, for lack of a better word. And it seems like you've taken that same, pragmatic operational approach to maximizing, seeing the importance of serendipity and seeing a gap in that market. And so you've taken to mentoring and working with small businesses and participating, in training leaders and whatnot to sort of maximize those connection points, to maximize those same happenings that influenced your life. Is that a safe?
Absolutely. I mean, I know that you are familiar with the Academy of Senior Professionals at Eckerd, and I belong to that. But also, there is a tremendous amount of running into very bright people who have some very creative ideas, and putting those folks in the classroom with my undergraduates. You can't force mentorship. That doesn't work. You find the teacher when you're ready to get the teacher, kind of thing. But exposing the students to people like that works wonders, because there's a communication. There may be some ideas that show up that cause a student to maybe change direction or head in a place that they hadn't thought about before. So I think the mentoring thing is very important. And it's one of the things I love about Eckerd is that we don't have academic advisors here. Students get faculty. And so if a student has an academic sort of issue, they come to the faculty, and the faculty are supposed to be, because we're in that discipline. I mean, I certainly know how to spell business, so we can talk about management issues. But also because you're creating that sort of connection, that connection stays long after they graduate. I got an email last night from a student who graduated. She graduated in 2010. Who was one of my, and we call them associates here, and she's actually looking to find a student at Eckerd for a project. So with that long-term relationship, you've got the potential of more things happening, and which I think is great. And Eckerd has a new president now, which I know you're aware of. And he has started a new strategic initiative, which we're working on right now. He's got 4 pillars, and one of those pillars is the city as classroom and the campus as laboratory. So he really wants our students to get downtown, which I think is great, because if a student runs into somebody like yourself who's done something that they may be interested in, there's possible connection there. I can remember, probably 2006, working on Central Avenue with students and connecting with the local businesses. And I think that becomes very important because, again, you don't know what's going to happen until you get yourself in these situations. And, I look at my life as you say, there's a whole bunch of events that just kind of showed up that allowed me to do something. The more events I can show the students downtown, outside the classroom, this is great.
So and I'd love, because I think that the way you approach it is very accessible and it almost has a systematic thinking behind it. So let's assume that someone watching this, is hearing what you're saying, but they don't have the built-in platform as a professor or working with students to just straight deliver this sort of opportunity, but yet in their life there's a mindset that they should try to stay in. That is, these connections really do matter. They can change the trajectory of people's lives. I have value in being that for someone. So how can the sort of layperson without those rails in place? How should they approach that as they live their life to be that for the younger generation or other people?
I think it's being open to experiences. One, and there are people out there who I just meet instantly. I know they are open to different experiences, and so yeah, I've got a PhD and I'm a retired Army officer and I'm a college professor, but some of the people that are the brightest people around, might have a GED or a high school diploma, but have made a life for themselves. So the education doesn't matter. It's the experiences that matter.
And the willingness to share them. And
that's the second part. A lot of times people are not necessarily willing to share them. But I love people coming in class and tell my students, okay, I basically came from the wrong zip code, but here's the kind of experiences I've had. So it doesn't make any difference, background. It's a
And I think I probably used the wrong word, willingness to share. I think it's more, a lot of times they don't realize the value they have to share, and so they don't consider doing it. I think it's just more recognizing that.
It's recognizing that they've got the experience, that the experience is meaningful. The sharing of that experience then becomes meaningful to other people. And you're right. That one's hard. Because a lot of times I'll be sitting around, and of course with COVID, that's a little difficult anymore. But sitting around with people and people be talking, and I'll go, we need to talk. You need to share that. Because there are people out there, will go, that's great. And so one of the things, we just wrote an article for the Aspect newsletter about having Aspect colleagues in class with undergraduates. And so I was teaching the foundational entrepreneurship course, and there was a young lady in there who has started her own film production company, which I think is kind of nifty when you're 20 years old. Ernie said, oh, you need to talk to so-and-so, and you need to talk to so-and-so in Chicago. And again, I don't know those people, but he does. And so it's that boundary spanning connection. And so she got in touch with them and is now, they're giving her their life experiences. So that connection becomes important.
And that's Ernie Mahaffey, for those not familiar. We hadn't introduced him yet. So moral of the story, I like the energy you had when we need to talk. We need to talk is a good slogan. And that means let's just keep the pathways to luck and serendipity open. If anybody wants to dig into any of the topics we discussed, where should they go? What website should they visit, or how should they connect?
Well, you can visit a website, or you can send me an email. And my email is a little weird, but that's okay. It's Eckerd, HAMILTFE, as in Frank Edward, at Eckerd, ECKERD.edu.
Enjoyed the conversation. Thank you for all that you do and all that you have done. It's a lot of good work and a lot of important work and a lot of work that people aren't paying attention to, which makes it even more special.
Yeah, there are several things that are going on. I mean, especially with animals that a lot of people don't pay attention to, but it's going on every day. So I got the same with the mentoring of students, or even mentoring of other people. It goes on just day to day, and we just sometimes don't pay attention to it. But I appreciate the time you took, Joe, and good talking to you as always.
Likewise, we'll speak again soon.